The silence in the grand rotunda was worse than laughter would have been. Ambassador Marcus Chen stood among the human delegation, watching as the seventh suitor of the evening turned his back on Princess Valeth and walked away without a word. The Corvani nobles in attendance didn't gasp or whisper. They simply looked elsewhere, as if the rejection were a stain too shameful to acknowledge. "The proceedings will continue," announced the court herald, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. "Are there further candidates of worthy lineage who wish to present themselves?" No one moved. Marcus had been on Corvin Prime for 3 months now, long enough to understand what he was witnessing. The Corvani selection ceremony was sacred, a ritual where eligible nobles declared their intent to court a royal daughter. To be passed over was unfortunate. To be rejected by every candidate was a political death sentence. He looked at the princess standing alone on the ceremonial dais. Valeth was tall, even by Corvani standards, her silver-blue skin catching the bioluminescent light of the chamber. She held herself perfectly still, spine rigid, chin raised. But Marcus had spent 20 years reading people across dozens of worlds, and he could see it, the micro-tremor in her hands, the way her secondary eyelids flickered just slightly too fast. She was breaking, and she was determined to break where no one could see. Queen Sereth rose from her throne, and the gesture sent ripples of attention through the gathered nobles. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of someone who had ruled for 2 centuries. "No one will choose my daughter," the queen said, and though her tone remained formal, Marcus heard the fracture beneath it. "In 400 years of our dynasty, no princess has stood alone at selection's end. Is there not one among you with the courage to, Your Majesty?" A senior noble stepped forward, his expression carefully blank. "Perhaps the princess would benefit from time. Another selection could be arranged after the unfortunate rumors have faded." "Rumors," the queen repeated, regarding the princess's temperament. "Her difficulties with previous arrangements. Surely you understand that noble houses must consider." "I understand perfectly, Lord Catherine." Marcus understood too. He'd heard the whispers during his diplomatic tenure. Princess Valeth had broken 2 previous betrothals, one because she'd refused to stop her scientific research, another because she'd publicly corrected her intended's false claims during a council session. In Corvani high society, such behavior marked her as uncontrollable, dangerous, unmarriageable. The herald raised his staff. "If no further candidates present themselves, the selection will be recorded as, I present myself." The words left Marcus's mouth before his brain fully authorized them. The entire chamber turned as one, and he felt 500 pairs of alien eyes fix on him like targeting systems. His aide, Lieutenant Taurus, grabbed his arm. "Sir, what are you?" Marcus stepped forward, out of the human delegation's carefully designated area, into the ceremonial space where only Corvani nobles were permitted to stand. The breach of protocol alone would have been enough to cause an incident. What he was doing went far beyond that. "I am Ambassador Marcus Chen of the United Earth Coalition," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I present myself as a candidate for the princess's consideration." Lord Catherine's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. Humans have no standing to participate in selection. You have no lineage, no holdings, no. The ceremony requirements state that candidates must hold a position of recognized authority within their people," Marcus interrupted. He'd read the protocols extensively. It was his job to know them. "As Earth's senior diplomatic representative to the Corvani Empire, I hold such authority. There is no species restriction in your laws. I've checked. The spirit of the law. I was taught that Corvani honor their written codes above all else." Marcus looked directly at the Queen. "Was I taught incorrectly, Your Majesty?" The queen's expression was unreadable. She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured down to his molecular structure. "You were not taught incorrectly, Ambassador," she finally said. "The ceremony recognizes your candidacy." The chamber erupted. Marcus ignored it. He walked toward the dais, toward the princess who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite decode. Shock, certainly, but something else underneath. Something that might have been the first spark of curiosity she'd shown all evening. He stopped at the prescribed distance and bowed, a human bow, not a Corvani one. He was done pretending to be something he wasn't. "Your Highness," he said, "I don't offer lineage or holdings because I have neither. What I offer is this, a chance to leave this room with your dignity intact. After that, the choice of what happens, or doesn't, is yours. I understand if you'd prefer to reject me as well. I won't be offended." Princess Valith looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. "You realize what you've done, the political implications for your people, yes, and you did it anyway. Why?" Marcus thought about the question. The honest answer was complicated. Something about watching her stand there alone. Something about his daughter who died 3 years ago in a colony accident. Something about all the times he'd seen good people broken by systems that didn't value them. "Because someone should have," he said simply, "and no one else was going to." The princess's secondary eyelids flickered. Surprise, he thought. Or perhaps something else. She raised her hand in the formal gesture of acceptance. "The selection recognizes one candidate," the herald announced, sounding like he was delivering news of an apocalypse. "The human Marcus Chen." In the corner of his vision, Marcus saw Lord Kethren's face contort with something beyond mere displeasure. The look was there, and gone in an instant. But Marcus had been a diplomat long enough to recognize it. He had just made an enemy. The courtship gardens were beautiful in a way that made Marcus feel slightly off balance. Bioluminescent plants that pulsed in synchronized rhythms, gravity that shifted subtly as you walked, flowers that sang in frequencies just at the edge of human hearing. He sat on a bench designed for Corvani proportions, which meant his feet didn't quite touch the ground. It should have felt ridiculous. Instead, he found it oddly appropriate. "You're early." Marcus stood as Princess Valith approached. She had exchanged her ceremonial robes for simpler attire, and somehow the change made her seem more real. Less like a symbol and more like a person. "Habit," he said. "My wife used to say I'd arrive early to my own funeral." "Used to?" She passed. 8 years ago now. Medical complications after our daughter was born. Valith sat on the bench across from him, maintaining the precise distance that Corvani protocol demanded during early courtship. "And your daughter? Gone too." 3 years ago. Colony accident on Proxima the 7T. Marcus was surprised at how easily the words came. He'd spent years learning not to talk about Elena. "I request permission to change the subject." "Granted." Valith's tone softened almost imperceptibly. "I should tell you that several council members have filed formal protests regarding your candidacy. Lord Kethren is demanding that the selection be invalidated. I expected as much. My mother has refused. For now." Valith studied him with those strange, beautiful eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a pattern that human artists found unsettling, but that Marcus had come to appreciate. "Why did you really step forward, Ambassador?" "Political advantage. Earth standing in the Corvani court is precarious. A marriage connection would change that." "Would it?" "Substantially. Access to restricted technologies, preferred trade agreements, military alliance provisions." "I know what the political benefits would be," Marcus interrupted gently. "I've been calculating them professionally for 3 months. But that's not why I did it." "Then why?" Marcus considered lying. Diplomatic training was essentially training in elegant dishonesty. But something about the directness of her gaze made him want to offer the same in return. Do you know what humans call that moment at the selection? When you were standing there alone, I imagine they have many words for it. We call it the longest walk. It's an old expression from human history, the walk a condemned person takes to their execution. I watched you standing there, and I realized you were doing it. Walking to your death, in a sense. And everyone was just watching. Valith was quiet for a moment, and you felt compelled to intervene. I felt compelled to offer you a door. Whether you walk through it is your choice. That's an unusually passive approach for a suitor. I'm not really a suitor, Your Highness. I'm a stranger who made a dramatic gesture. The suitor part, if it happens at all, would come later, and only if you want it to. Valith's secondary eyelids flickered in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as her tell for surprise. You genuinely don't expect anything from this arrangement. I expect complications, political entanglements, and probably several assassination attempts. Beyond that, no. The assassination attempts are not a joke. Lord Kethrin's faction has killed for less. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. One of the singing flowers shifted its pitch, creating a harmony with its neighbors that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. You're not what I expected, Valith said finally. When I saw you step forward, I assumed arrogance. Humans are known for it, the young species that thinks itself destined for greatness. Some of us, certainly. But you're not arrogant. You're... She paused, searching for the word. Tired. No, that's not right either. You're someone who has already lost what he values most, and so you no longer fear loss. Marcus felt the observation land somewhere deep in his chest. That's more perceptive than most analyses I've read about myself. I've had practice at watching people who are performing versus people who are genuine. Valith's voice carried an edge of bitterness. My previous betrotheds were performers. They wanted the princess, the political connection, the reflected glory. They had no interest in the person underneath. When they discovered that the person had opinions, and voiced them, and refused to become a decorative accessory, they left. They discovered they had more important commitments elsewhere. Valith's tone was carefully neutral. The polite fiction was maintained. The shame was mine to carry. That's absurd. It's tradition. Then your tradition is absurd. Marcus said it flatly, without diplomatic softening. You were rejected for being intelligent and honest. Those should be qualifications, not disqualifications. Valith stared at him. You truly believe that? I truly believe that. Another long silence. The garden's lights pulsed around them, painting shifting patterns across Valith's silver-blue skin. I would like to show you something, she said finally. My research laboratory. I'm told it's the reason I'm unmarriageable. My unseemly dedication to work unbefitting a princess. I'd like you to see it. Marcus stood, offering his hand without thinking. A human gesture, inappropriate by Corvani's standards at this stage of courtship. He realized his error a moment too late. Valith looked at his extended hand. Her secondary eyelids flickered. Then, slowly, she took it. The attack came 3 weeks later, at the worst possible moment. Marcus had been in Valith's laboratory, watching her explain her research into quantum-locked genetic preservation. He understood perhaps a third of it, enough to grasp that she was brilliant, that her work could revolutionize how the Corvani maintained their genetic archives, and that the Council had been systematically defunding her projects for years. They prefer I spend my time on ceremonial functions, Valith said, adjusting a microscope that had more computing power than Marcus's entire embassy. A princess should be decorative, not functional. On Earth we had similar attitudes once. Some places still do. And how did your species address it? Badly, mostly. Then slowly, painfully, with a lot of setbacks. We're still working on it. Valeth made a sound that might have been a laugh. Honest, at least. That was when the lights went out. Marcus had survived 2 assassination attempts earlier in his career, one on Tau Ceti, one during the Bellatrix negotiations. He recognized the signature instantly, power cut, followed by 3 seconds of confusion, then the strike. He grabbed Valeth and pulled her down behind the laboratory bench just as the first plasma bolt seared through the space where her head had been. "Stay down," he hissed. "My laboratory won't matter if you're dead." He could hear them now, at least 3 sets of footsteps, moving with military precision. Professional killers, not amateurs. Lord Kethran had spent serious resources on this. Marcus's sidearm was in his quarters, half a kilometer away. Diplomatic protocol prohibited weapons in the princess's presence. He'd complained about that rule for months. "Is there another exit?" he whispered. "Emergency hatch. North wall. But it requires my biometric authorization, and they'll expect me to run for it." "Then we won't run." Marcus looked around the darkened lab, his eyes adjusting slowly. "Can any of this equipment be weaponized? This is a genetics laboratory, not an armory. Everything can be weaponized. What do you have that's dangerous?" Valeth's secondary eyelids flickered. He could see them even in the darkness, a faint phosphorescent glow, the preservation units. If the containment fields are disrupted, they release a burst of radiation. Non-lethal to Corvani, but extremely disorienting. "Do it. I'll lose months of research." "Valeth." Marcus grabbed her shoulders, pulling her close enough that he could see the fear beneath her composure. "Your research matters. You matter. We can rebuild the research." "I can't rebuild you." She stared at him for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then she nodded. What followed was chaos. Valeth triggered the containment breach. The laboratory filled with light and sound, radiation alarms, emergency systems, the screams of assassins who hadn't prepared for a counterattack. Marcus moved through the chaos like he'd been born to it, using the disorientation to close distance, to strike, to disable. He wasn't a soldier, but he'd spent 20 years in places where diplomacy failed. He knew how to survive. By the time the palace guards arrived, 3 assassins were unconscious, and Marcus was bleeding from a wound in his shoulder that he didn't remember receiving. "Ambassador." The guard captain looked horrified. "You're injured." "I'm fine. The princess is unharmed." Valeth's voice came from behind him, and Marcus turned to find her standing there, staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Because of him. The investigation that followed was swift. The assassins were traced to Lord Kethran's household within hours. By dawn, he had fled to the outer colonies, his faction scattered, his name struck from noble registers. Marcus sat in the medical wing while Corvani doctors fussed over his shoulder, applying treatments that tingled and burned and healed far faster than human medicine could manage. He was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. The door opened. Valeth entered, alone. "The doctors say you'll recover fully," she said, standing at a distance that suddenly felt wrong. Too formal. Too far. "That's what they tell me. You could have been killed." "Yes, why did you stay?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. "When the attack began, any rational person would have fled. Use the confusion to escape. You had no obligation to." "Yes, I did." Marcus stood, ignoring the protests of his injured shoulder. He walked toward her, stopping just short of the distance that Corvani protocol demanded. "You asked me once why I stepped forward at the selection," he said. "I told you it was because someone should have. That was true, but it wasn't complete." "Then tell me completely." "I had a daughter, Elena Dotti. She was brilliant, like you. Curious, honest, determined. She wanted to be a xenobiologist. Study alien ecosystems, understand how life evolved differently across the galaxy. Marcus felt the old grief rising, but he didn't push it down. Not this time. She died because a colony administrator decided that safety protocols were too expensive, that the lives of researchers weren't worth the investment. I couldn't save her. I was 3 systems away, negotiating a trade agreement, when his voice broke. He let it. I couldn't save her. But I saw you standing alone in that chamber, being abandoned by people who should have valued you. I thought, I can't change what happened to Elena, but maybe I can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Maybe I can be there this time. Velith's eyes were glistening. Tears, he realized. Corvani wept differently than humans, the fluid more viscous, catching the light like tiny gems. You see your daughter in me? She said quietly. That's why you protect me. I did, at first. Marcus took a breath. But that's not why I stayed tonight. Tonight, I stayed because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, you stopped being a symbol of what I lost. You became someone I can't imagine losing. He reached out, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. His hand touched her cheek, the first intimate contact they'd shared. Her skin was cool against his palm, smooth in ways human skin wasn't, and yet somehow the contact felt more natural than anything he'd experienced in years. I'm not offering you my protection, he said. I'm offering you myself. All of it, the broken parts, the damaged parts, the parts that are still learning how to feel something other than grief. If you don't want that, I understand. But I needed you to know. Velith closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had changed. A wall coming down, a decision being made. I've spent my entire life being told what I should want, she said. A proper husband, proper behavior, a proper role. I've never had someone offer me choice instead of expectation. She turned her head, pressing her cheek more firmly into his palm. I choose this, she whispered. I choose you. The wedding was nothing like Marcus had expected. Corvani ceremonies were typically elaborate affairs, weeks of rituals, endless protocols, symbolic exchanges that required memorizing thousands of gestures and phrases. He had been dreading it. Instead, Queen Sereth had declared a simplified ceremony. Given the extraordinary circumstances she announced to the council, and the proven devotion of the human candidate, traditional protocols are hereby modified. What she meant, Marcus understood, was that she'd seen her daughter smile for the first time in years and was willing to break centuries of tradition to preserve it. The ceremony took place in the courtship gardens, where they'd had their first real conversation. Attendance was limited. The Queen, a handful of witnesses, Lieutenant Torres representing the Earth delegation, and the royal court chaplain who looked deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. Marcus stood at the ceremonial arch, wearing a hybrid outfit that the palace tailors had designed, human formal structure with Corvani colors and patterns. It should have looked absurd. Somehow it didn't. Velith walked toward him, and the breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, not in the exotic alien way that human media fetishized, but in the way that anyone who truly sees another person finds them beautiful. The curve of her neck, the intelligence in her eyes, the slight nervous tremor in her hands that she thought she was hiding but wasn't. She stopped before him. The chaplain began speaking, but Marcus barely heard the words. He was too busy watching Velith, reading her micro-expressions, seeing the moment when her nervousness transformed into something else. Peace, he thought. She looks peaceful. The binding words, the chaplain prompted. Velith spoke first, as was traditional for the higher-ranked party. I enter this union with clear eyes and full heart. I accept your presence in my house, your voice in my councils, your hand in partnership. I bind my lineage to your future. The words were formal, ancient, laden with political implications. But the way she said them, looking directly at him, her voice steady and warm, made them something more. Marcus took a breath. I enter this union with clear eyes and full heart. I offer my loyalty, my support, my honest counsel. I bind my life to your well-being, not as servant or protector, but as equal partner in whatever comes." The chaplain made a small sound of surprise. Those weren't the traditional words. Marcus had modified them, with the Queen's permission, to reflect something closer to what he actually meant. Valeth's secondary eyelids flickered, that familiar tell, but this time he saw it clearly as joy. "The binding is witnessed and recorded," the chaplain said. "Under the laws of the Corvani Empire, and by the authority vested in this office, I declare this union complete." It was done. Marcus Chen, former ambassador, was now officially consort to Princess Valeth of the Corvani Empire. Later, at the small reception the Queen had insisted on, Marcus stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The bioluminescent towers pulsed with patterns celebrating the wedding, and somewhere in the distance he could hear singing. Valeth joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're quiet," she said. "Processing. This morning I was a minor diplomat from a minor species. Tonight I'm Corvani royalty. Consort to royalty. There's a distinction. Is there? Legally, yes. Practically." Valeth's hand found his in the darkness. "Practically you're my partner, in all things. That's what I meant when I spoke the binding words." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I know." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights pulse and flow. "My mother said something to me today," Valeth said eventually. "Before the ceremony. She told me that when she spoke those words at the selection, about no one choosing her daughter, she had already given up hope. She was speaking to the historical record, not expecting anything to change." "What changed her mind?" "She said she watched you step forward, and for the first time in years, she saw someone act without calculation, without political motive. You stepped forward because it was right, not because it was advantageous." Valeth turned to face him. She said, "That's rarer than you know. Among any species. I'm not that noble. I had selfish reasons too. I know. I know about Elena, about your wife, about the grief you've been carrying. Those aren't selfish reasons, Marcus. They're human ones." She reached up, touching his face in a mirror of the gesture he'd made in the medical wing. "Humanity, we're told, is a young species. Aggressive, emotional, unpredictable. The other great powers debate whether you're a threat or an opportunity." Valeth's eyes met his. "They're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what humanity might become. It's what humanity already is, and what that means for those of us fortunate enough to know you." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he hadn't known was there, unraveling. "What are we?" he asked. "In your analysis, you're people who step forward when no one else will. Who offer choice instead of expectation. Who protect what you value, even at cost to yourselves." Valeth smiled, a full smile, unreserved, the first he'd ever seen from her. "You're exactly what a lonely princess needed, even if she didn't know it." Marcus pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that bridged the physical differences between their species. She fit against him imperfectly, too tall, proportioned differently, her heartbeat in the wrong place, and somehow that imperfection felt more right than anything had in years. "For what it's worth," he said into her hair, "you're exactly what a grieving diplomat needed, even if he didn't know it either." They stood together on the balcony, watching as the celebration continued below. Tomorrow, there would be political complications, council sessions, the hard work of building a life between two cultures. There would be challenges they couldn't yet imagine, enemies who would resent their union, moments when the weight of their responsibilities seemed unbearable. But tonight, there was only this. Two people who had found each other across the vast gulf of space and species and circumstance. Two people who had chosen each other not despite their brokenness, but with full knowledge of it. Two people who had decided that the risk of hope was worth taking. In the garden below, the singing flowers shifted their harmony, creating something new, a blend of frequencies that neither fully Corvani nor fully human, but something unique to this moment. A wedding song for an unprecedented union, the beginning of something that would change everything.